Gabriel quit. The relationship with Russia continued to tantalize and traumatize. Isolated again, ironically, the Daily Worker's achievements as an elegantly designed newspaper nevertheless continued to bring in the accolades. In this cold, cold climate, the paper's resources were the readers themselves. The fund was an eternal appeal to the communist congregation. Fund organiser Barbara Niven and her successor Zelda Curtis conducted an intimate drama of exhortation and encouragement. They raised a fortune.
We really were fighting for our lives all the way, every day. You know, people now say to me from my past, oh, even as children, we used to look at your column in the each day to see how close we were. It was so exciting. And so it was that sort of fight that really meant something to everybody because they knew that it was for survival. It was a tremendous thing for them to be able to write and receive back a letter from somebody in the Star or the Daily Worker before it. And that was the main job of the person within that fund department, to keep that connection going. And sometimes it was personal things they wrote about. Almost like sort of Auntie Zelda, you know, tell us what to do. But one kept out of that if one could. But the relationship was a very warm, needing relationship. They needed the paper tremendously.
The sense of dedication there was enormous, especially maybe in the features department, where we all felt that by developing our own particular style of criticism in our own field, we were helping to broaden the paper and make it more popular, make it really like a daily paper. And there was a great deal of self-sacrifice right through the paper at that time. We certainly weren't doing it for the money. And many of us were, in any case, activists in other fields. I mean, the paper was very rich in its campaigning for unionism, for tenants and so on. I mean, I myself was a tenants leader and had, you know, worked with groups of tenants. So we all had our feet very much on the ground, and we were all looking at the Daily Worker as a means of achieving a better Britain.
The paper exposed Britain's notorious slums in the 1930s, and virtually alone in the 1950s, chronicled day by day the effects of the Conservative Rent Act, the mass evictions and the rent rises, culminating in the great rent strikes of the 1960s. Campaigning journalism had its own inflection on the Daily Worker.
We were journalists who were also communists, or communists who were also journalists. We weren't one or the other. And I think a lot of the problems arose when the party somehow wanted us to use what skill we had to present the line without being actively engaged in the nature of the line. We recognised that things like the book page, the theatre coverage, the TV and show business coverage and so on, all the other cultural items, here was an opportunity for finding a legitimate space for non-editorial opinion. It's possible in a book review to express opinions which are legitimate opinions for socialist discussion, but don't happen to be those of the editor of the paper or the leadership of the party.
There were a lot of objections to using too much space for cultural matters because some people thought that the space could be better used. And don't forget, we were only a 4-page paper, sometimes a 6-page paper, and we had to cram everything into these 4 or 6 pages. And some people thought that it should be devoted entirely to trade union matters, to tenants matters, and so on. And it's true that we were the only paper that was covering it, but we thought that it should cover everything, you see.
A great debate among the readers decided to change the name to broaden its appeal. Some felt that this was an abandonment of the class struggle. One of them, Alan Hutt, the great typographer, walked out.
Every step that we took to try and broaden the paper was bringing about a corresponding resistance by sectarian elements in the party who had remained dormant when theirs was the general tone. But the moment that the party line began to be properly debated and indeed changed, the difference in the party line between 1956 over Hungary and in 1968 over Czechoslovakia tantamount to a political revolution. And a lot of people were not used to that kind of thing. They liked the old certainties. Soviet Union good, everybody else bad.
On that morning of August the 22nd, 1968, when I came into the office, all hell had been let loose because there were members of the editorial staff shouting and screaming at each other about what the Russians had done. And I said, well, somebody said to me, well, they'd been invited in. And I said, yes, been invited in by a bunch of bloody quislings. When everybody, a lot of people got very annoyed, and one member of the editorial staff turned around to me and said, I don't give a damn what you are saying about what the Russians have done. As for me, I would sleep far better at night if there were Soviet tanks in Farringdon Road. Well, I mean, that's a sort of slogan to go to the masses with in Britain, tanks in Farringdon Road. And there was a great deal of heart-burning and about this matter, but there was no doubt in my mind that what the Russians had done was absolutely scandalous and criminal, and that was the paper's attitude.
The paper opposed the invasion. Whatever different views there might be among socialist countries about developments in Czechoslovakia, in our view, military intervention is completely unjustified.
I think the difference between that and Hungary was that we ourselves were beginning to think differently, so we could explore. But of course, what it did was to divide the party very, very thoroughly, but without them leaving the party like after Hungary. So that what we then had was a fight on our hands within the readership of the paper and within the members of the party. It became a real locked battle then.
The invasion traumatized international communism at the very moment when the flowering of new cultures and new causes claimed the world's attention.
Now, to get things clear, all those in favour.
Even the traditional troops, the trade unionists who were the spine of the daily workers' coverage, the envy of Fleet Street, they too were not only on the move, they were changing.
We're responsible people, and we'll conduct ourselves with the dignity and discipline that we have all the time expressed over the last few weeks, and there will be no hooliganism, there will be no vandalism.
There's a symbiotic relationship between the daily worker and the Morning Star and class strugglers. But a great debate takes place in the late 1960s and throughout the 1970s about the nature of class struggle, as well as the nature of the paper. Is it to be only for and about the archetypical worker, the shop steward, the docker, the car worker, the miner, or is it about all of human life? After the appointment of a new editor, Tony Chater, in the mid-70s, the paper became increasingly estranged from these great debates and was heading for a crisis, both within the paper itself and within the party.
The demand for democracy today is not a reformist demand, it's a revolutionary demand. That is the spirit.
There was an unprecedented revolt by the rank and file at the 1977 Party Congress.
And then to unite and fight for it.
Fed up with endless exhortation to sell, 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 They felt the paper was no longer good enough, neither professionally nor politically.